What's up, guys? So the last thing that I want to talk you through is nutrition and recovery, the nutrition and recovery section of this program. Because if we're not considering how we recover from the training, then we're going to run into issues. It's a 12-week program. So it's not like 3 or 4 weeks where you can overdo it and you'll get away with it. This is really key because we need to make sure that we are fully recovered, rested, ready to get the training sessions done, ready to perform in whatever sporting events you need to perform, and ultimately able to get the results and the adaptation that we're looking for throughout the plan. So nutrition and recovery as a whole is going to be absolutely essential. So the key considerations today that we're going to go through are stress, lifestyle management factors. We're going to look at recovery from a training perspective. We're going to look at sleep, and we're going to look at nutrition. So again, some extremely key things to be considering, extremely key areas to be looking at. And hopefully you will take a lot out of this before you start the program. It's going to make a lot of sense when we go into the detail of why the program's written how it is. So the first off, stress and lifestyle management. First thing we need to mention is physiology of stress. Stress is not just an emotional state. It's not just something that's, a psychological state that's going on. There is going to be a physiological impact of stress. What I mean by that is that whenever we're getting stressed, our body's ultimately preparing to exercise, preparing for that high stress situation. The trouble is that most of the things that are probably stressing you out at the minute are not something that requires you to have that same stress response. What the stress response is doing is preparing you for a big burst of activity. And if that big burst of activity doesn't come and we get a lot of low-level stress responses, that's going to ultimately affect our appetite, it's going to affect our training, it's going to affect our focus, and it's certainly going to affect our adaptation and our ability to move forward. So avoiding high stress situations and a high stress lifestyle is something that is really key for athletic development, especially on training plans that have a lot of volume and a lot of intensity. So any training plan, such as the one that you're on at the minute, we need to be aware that stress as a whole needs managing. It's not that the stress is a bad thing, it's that you need to be able to balance that. You need to be able to balance the high stress with the recovery. So how do we do this? How do we keep stress to a minimum? Well, one of the things is planning an organization. Planning an organization is absolutely key because it allows you to set when your training days are going to be, allows you to set what times you're going to be putting certain events in. It allows you to not be running late, rushing around all the time, which is going to elevate your stress levels. It allows you to have tasks set aside at certain times that you deal with at that time. If you're chaotic and you're letting things come up and letting things get in the way, then ultimately that's going to be increasing your stress. And how I want you to view stress right now is that as your stress is increasing from anything outside of the gym, it's directly affecting your performance in the gym and on the pitch, whatever your athletic performance or athletic endeavor is. High stress lifestyles are not going to suit that. So it's going to happen. You're going to have high stress. You're going to have to deal with stress at certain points, but managing this is really key. Training. Often people use training to manage the stress. So they have a stressful day and they go for a run or go in the gym. Guys, I want you to almost disassociate training from stress management. You're going to be training and exercising a lot. What I want you to make sure that you're doing is looking at stress from a psychological, from a cognitive sort of standpoint, and making sure that we're putting in things such as switching off, things such as meditating, having time to relax rather than going into the gym or going to go for a run to de-stress. If you're in that stress state, it's going to affect your performance. We want to be in an optimum state for training. It's not always going to happen, but just being aware of it and aware that actually that time for relaxation is absolutely as important as everything else throughout this plan. Healthier habits we'll talk about in terms of sleep, in terms of nutrition. But one thing that I want to bring up there is that if your stress management is getting a couple of beers, there is a certain point where that's not going to help you on this plan. Not always, having 1 or 2 drinks, absolutely fine. But having a lot of alcohol, having a lot of junk food and things like that, if they're your coping mechanisms, we need to have a chat and jump into the Facebook group, because we'll talk about what are other alternatives and good coping mechanisms for dealing with stress and what are going to be counterproductive to you making progress. And the final point is perception. We have to remember with stress that it is all about how we perceive the situation. So if we can reframe things, if you need to talk through some stuff with us, whether it's in the group, whether you need to send me a direct message, what I'll try to do is reframe that for you, just so that we can manage this stress a little bit better, because ultimately your adaptation, your performance throughout the 12 weeks, your ability to stick to the plan, your ability to get the most from the training program is going to come down to this stress management. So moving on, recovery. Guys, I've looked after this as much as possible, but what I want to consider here is the training schedule. If I'm saying 6-7 RPE, that means that you've got a little bit left in the tank. What I don't want to see is week 1, everyone going in 100% into this training. Volume will accumulate throughout the week, the intensity will accumulate throughout the week. And if you've got other training sessions to manage, especially if you've got performance to manage as well, this is something that you really need to be aware of. So managing the entire training schedule, if you're not doing anything else alongside this plan, then you can push it a little bit further, maybe take your RPE up to 1 higher than what I've said. But even in that situation, to be honest, get through the first week as it's written, see how your body copes, see how your body recovers, see how you cope with the endurance work, see how you cope with everything together, and we'll make a decision based on that. Also, you need to be aware of your non-training activity. So how active are you at work? How active are you day to day? Your recovery methods are something that you can put in if you know that you're training often, you know that you're not quite recovering as well. Of course, we're going to look at sleep. Of course, we're going to look at nutrition. Those two are separate on this presentation. But other recovery methods, low intensity training, there's a recovery day already planned in there for you. Making sure that that's a recovery session and not a training session can be extremely important if you're struggling to manage this volume in this training program. If you've got any questions, if you're feeling too beat up from the program, guys, give me a message and I will tell you how to adjust the program to make it work for you. Ultimately, it comes down to capacity. What is your total capacity that you can deal with? How much training tolerance have you built up? This is why elite athletes can train and have to train as much as they do, is that they've spent years building up to a huge training capacity. And that means that they need a really high stimulus, but it also means that they can deal with that level of work. We can't look at plans for people that have been training day in, day out for 5-10 years and assume that that's the way that we should train. We need to start off by building these levels, building this capacity, making the structural changes, and then going from there. And ultimately, we will be able to handle more. And you'll see that as we go through the 12 weeks in this program. So guys, really quickly on sleep. Sleep is when we are going to rebuild, when we're going to recover. So ultimately, you cannot skip this section. It's really difficult to say how much sleep you need. Everybody's got a slightly different structure in terms of how much sleep is going to be optimum for them. What we tend to know is that even if you're coping off less sleep, off 4.5, 5 hours, that is certainly not likely to be optimum. The more training you do, the more recovery your body needs, the more sleep you will ultimately need as well. So really important. And if you're struggling with sleep, that can come right back round to stress management and lifestyle management, can come right back round to sort of a high sympathetic drive from too much training. So again, if you're struggling with these things, you can speak to us, but make sure that you try out the different sleep hygiene habits first that we'll speak about in the Facebook group. But guys, in addition to that, sleep, realistically, it allows us to be focused, alert, allows us to get more out of the training session on that day, and it allows us to ultimately perform better in our sport. It also allows us to be less likely to pick up injuries and less likely to pick up illnesses, which over a year means a hell of a lot more training time. So really important considerations. Ultimately, if you're not getting enough sleep, your impact on training performance, game performance, and adaptation is going to be huge. So we need to make sure that that is something that is considered throughout. So guys, the last thing, nutrition. This is an absolute key consideration. But what we need to be aware of is how much training, how much you're moving throughout the day, and what your energy requirements are. There's a calculator that I've linked to this video just to give you a basic indication of a starting point in terms of calories, in terms of how you should be fueling. One of the key things here is that if you are training for fat loss, remember that this is a performance-focused program. Phase 1, we can afford to pull the carbs down a little bit. It's much more aerobic focused, and even though there are strength sessions, they are focused on getting you used to the movements, getting you into the training. So providing that you've got enough food and enough fuel for those training sessions, your adaptation from that first phase shouldn't be massively affected by your dieting. You don't need to diet throughout that phase, absolutely, but it sort of works alongside it. As we get into phase 2 and 3, fat loss cannot be your primary goal. If it is, you need to be on a different sort of training program, because these start to get intense, and we need to be fueling that training. We're looking for the adaptation. We're looking to get stronger, get faster, get more explosive. And these things mean that you need to fuel the work that you're doing in the gym and fuel the adaptation that you're getting when you're out of the gym. So really important. So guys, hopefully, I mean, in terms of nutrition, I'll cover the habits that we always cover. Make sure that you're eating enough, obviously, but that sort of sits separate. Starting point for nutrition is eat enough protein, eat enough veg, drink enough water, cut down on your junk foods if that's a massive part of your diet. If you're doing that, please be aware that if that takes out a hell of a lot of calories, then you need to replace those calories with some suitable options. We can speak about that. Again, send me a message or drop it into the Facebook group. The Facebook group is a brilliant place for this. And watch your alcohol intake. I know that having a few beers after a match on a Saturday or Sunday and things might be commonplace at the minute. However, if you're stepping into this and saying, I want to make these changes and want to make these adaptations, then we need to be mindful of how much alcohol you're consuming. So guys, hopefully that gives us a quick overview of, fairly quick. I know it was 13 minutes, but a quick overview of nutrition, recovery, lifestyle management, sleep, all of those factors. And what we can do is just make sure that we're looking after this throughout the training program. If you are, then I guarantee you will get the results from this program that you're looking for. Guys, thanks for joining me, and let's get into the training.